I know Chris from our Agile Opens that we were producing yearly, and I particularly was impressed with Chris. Chris will tell you about himself in his own words. I just want to say that a couple of years ago, I put on session at Agile Open when and if AI is going to replace an Agile coach. And we had a great conversation where Chris really sparkled and impressed me with the depth and the width of his knowledge. He was just kind of like in Marion Trench. So much information in there and like so many references. And I was just like, wow, what a guy. Gotta invite him. So here he is. Please take it away. More programming and team dynamics.
Thank you so much. And that was a wonderful session. I really enjoyed that. Okay, so very quickly, I want to just send a link to everybody, and then I'll begin sharing my slides. Let me figure out how to do that very quickly. But that link has a retro board, and you can make sticky notes with your answers, and then hit the publish all button when you want to show your answers to everyone. So some of the questions in there, let me see, I can share. This will stop the other screen sharing. Yeah, so what's on the share currently, you can kind of see it. And you can scroll to the right, and there are a few more other questions there. Let me show here. I will present screen 3 for now, share that. Are you able to see, what do you see right now? Okay. So how many bugs are in your bug database? Have you ever mobbed programmed before? How often and how long? About what is the cycle time for a single team? Can you think of anyone that if they left the company, it would be a disaster for you? You know, how often do your teams experiment with their process? And can you think of anything that should have been automated a long time ago? So these questions will become relevant as we go forward. So if everybody could just take a moment to kind of run through and just answer these to the best of your ability, it doesn't have to be perfect. That'll kind of help get us started a little bit. Make sure you hit the publish button once you write the answer to the question, and it'll be kind of interesting, you know, to kind of go back and talk about these answers as we go forward. And I'm going to switch the screen share in 1 second here to the other screen. Let's see, so I'm going to stop that. I'm going to share one more time. And we will do screen 2, which I believe now, are you able to see the presentation? Yeah, okay, perfect. Countless, none. Yeah, these are good answers already. Don't keep a bug database, those are good. Cycle time is way too long for someone. Trying mob programming every once in a while. All right, so go ahead and keep answering those, and I will kind of just run through some of the things that we have. So you can find me on Twitter at Christoph Lucian. It's pretty much on every slide, and then chrislucian.com. You can kind of find me that way as well. So my history, you know, I started doing software development in the medical billing industry. Then I went to cardboard box manufacturing, military contracting and environmental chemistry, and now irrigation and lighting. So I'm just kind of all over the place. Couple manufacturing companies in there, which I think has helped me with my lean process thinking. So where I work now is Hunter Industries. So my team specifically works on IoT products as well as internal software, and so as well as high-end lighting. And so in this picture, you can kind of see these are the MP rotators, which have these individual streams optimized for distribution uniformity to water the grass. We write control systems so you can control these sprinklers from your phone, as well as these lights here, outdoor lighting that also complements the products as well. Back in about 2011, I joined the team. We started going on hikes a lot, things like that. And one thing that was there when I started, because this is Woody Zool was the manager. It was essentially a team that had been struggling for a while. He was hired 3 months before me. I interviewed there and hired on with him. I was actually at a user group. That's where I found this job, because I saw Woody speak, and then I wanted to go work with him. And so I ended up doing that. And this is something that he instated, which is which I later called the virtuous loop, which is learning sessions, dedicated learning time, and retrospectives. So retrospectives to iterate on the process, and dedicated learning time to bring in new ideas. So as I was working there was essentially a developer that was saying, I'm not going to meet this tax-related deadline, and it's really important that we do. And so we need to get into a room so that I can, so that we can meet the deadline. We can get into a room together and work together. So we ended up doing that. And so that was essentially the beginning of mob programming. So this was kind of, many of these members were the first members on the team. Some had switched by the time we'd taken this picture, but essentially we had a Kanban board. You see all the cards there. And we were essentially, after a number of retrospectives, we decided to continue doing mob programming. It didn't really have a name back then. This is something that the mob programming term is something that we coined as a team, because we were like, what do we call this? I don't know. We just work this way every day now. Essentially, a agile coach had come by for a visit and was like, what are you doing? And then we were like, we're programming together on the same computer. And they're like, you should name this and talk about it. So we're like, okay, that makes sense. We started writing unit tests. This is the current core development process, I would say. So you can kind of see that if you come into a new piece of functionality, you write end-to-end tests, you write integration and unit tests. You slice, peel, mock, and inject dependencies. You make those go green, refactor, slice, peel, mock, and inject underlying dependencies. You go through, evaluate code smells, refactor, determine if it's loosely coupled, if it's cohesive, if it's following appropriate design patterns. We go green, commit and push. We identify if it's triangulated and go forward. So this is after many iterations. Something happened though. Bug count dropped tremendously. We essentially, we went from about 300 bugs in the bug database, which is why I was asking about it, down to 0 in probably about 6 months or so. And this was in the course of actually releasing things as we were mobbing. So we mobbed for we took that 1.5-year project that was stalled. We started it from scratch and delivered it in 3 months. And now it's, obviously there's more people working on it, but we delivered it in high quality. And then everything we built after that, we also mobbed. We shared knowledge, and so this was kind of the work environment back then, so 2 projectors on a wall, that's whiteboard paint projector paint on the back there. And we would just talk about the code, and it was just in front of us. And so, I think it's been really good. Cycle time went down and customer satisfaction went up. And I have a timeline at the end of the presentation of many of the things that ended up happening. Essentially about a year or so in, we started essentially not getting any bug reports back from production at all. And so at our best, we had 1.5 years of no bugs reported from production, releasing twice a day to production. And so cycle time of 2 times a day, and so on and so forth. And most teams right now, we currently have 7 mobs, and we get similar quality gains, in kind of the multi-months of no bugs reported back from that team. we essentially merged the QA team and the development team because the QA team was just saying, yeah, it looks good, and then passing it forward. Yeah, it looks good. Yeah, it looks good. So we basically said, well, come and write the tests with us, and then do the development with us anyway. And so we brought them together. And then there was, about 4 years in, Woody had left the team. We were kind of, we didn't really have a manager. We were just kind of developing stuff. And I was going to work on my PhD in Portland. And so I was going to leave. And then the company made me an offer to stay and be a director of a new department that would then scale. So then we scaled the team. And so a third-party consultant had come in and evaluated all the software development practices across the company, and basically said, whatever you have going on with this team, you should grow it, and essentially incorporate it into all of your projects. So we inherited 3 legacy projects that were also stalled. Essentially, there was maybe 6 years of code that was unreleased that was essentially not releasable anymore. And there was no clean iteration cycle. We started mobbing it, and in about 6 months, we had the first working release that was out to beta customers for a full-fledged, system. Today, all 3 of those projects are released and iterating. Many of those have cycle times of multiple times a day, and that kind of is a little bit of the history. So maybe that's like a little bit of a case as to why you might experiment with something like this. And so kind of going through that list back there, kind of say countless bugs in the bug database, or too many. Some say no database. I don't know if that means no database with no bugs or no database with bugs. And so some people have mob programmed, cycle time way too long in some cases. And so, yeah, everyone, yes, many, as far as silos. So hopefully this talk will be very interesting to the people that are answering my questions here. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about them as we go. Okay, so this is the mob programming RPG. So this is a really great way for like new people to get people unfamiliar with mob programming in general. They don't realize that there's multiple roles. And so I really like the mob programming RPG that was developed by Willem Larsen. Willem and I were talking, he was working with us for some time, and we were just saying there needs to be like a taxonomy, because there's all these words that we use like driver, navigator, archivist, automationist, sponsor, that no one really knows when you talk about mob programming. They just, a lot of the questions we get are like, oh, well, is it just like, one person types at the keyboard and 3 people watch, right? And so you can kind of see in these examples here, the driver and the navigator. So I'll go back to the driver. The driver gets experience points whenever they ask a clarifying question about what to type something they disagree with, use a keyboard shortcut, learn something new about tooling, ignore a direct instruction from someone else who isn't the navigator while at the keyboard. So the driver obviously needs to be listening to the navigator and not just typing aimlessly, right? And then the navigator asks for ideas, filter the mob's ideas, and tell the driver exactly what to type. Tell the driver only high-level intent and have them implement the details, create a failing test, make it pass, and refactor. So these are incentives to behave the correct way. I'll do one more of these, and then I'll be much more general as we go forward. So here's the mobber: yield to the less privileged voice, contribute an idea, ask questions until you understand, and listen on the edge of your seat. So this might be somebody who's not the navigator, not the driver. They're listening on the edge of their seat. And then the next few slides are all going to be essentially other roles. So, somebody might pull out their laptop and do some research about what is coming next, and then becoming the next navigator. So things don't really stop, right? Or the sponsor. So this might be somebody who is looking for moments of excellence and celebrating them. Hey, did you see that we just refactored that? And that's been in the code base forever. Like, that's let's cheer, And so in our department, we'd have, when we were physically co-located, you'd have people, and this is like probably one of the only things I miss about being in an office, is that one team would cheer and then other teams wouldn't know why they cheered, but all the other teams would cheer. And so you'd have this like big hurrah go all across the building. And so that was really cool. And that was like a sponsor sort of thing, or maybe somebody saying, hey, I heard somebody's talking, but I didn't hear what they said. Can we all stop and listen to what they had to say? Navigator of the Navigator is a really great one. This is if somebody's navigating too much and no one else knows where to go, that person's probably very tired. And so what they should do is they should take a step back and go into the Navigator of the Navigator scenario, which may be draw a picture of the diagram of what they're thinking, tell the navigator or whisper to the navigator what to do next, or in these days, send a chat to the navigator of what to do next. And then that navigator then says out loud what to do, right? The automationist, so any boring, repetitive, rote task can be automated. So it's just somebody that says, hey, let's stop for a moment, let's automate that thing because it's really costing us a lot of time. And there's a really great phenomenon, and this is part of the team dynamics of the talk, is that people can, essentially, one person might deal with a rote, repetitive task many times and not automate it, right? But 4 people are not. It's going to drive them crazy, right? And so what happens is you naturally get the entire team opting to automate things that should have been a long time ago, which is another implication of one of the things that I had said. The nose is a really good one. So this is, have you seen any code lately that smells bad? Well, the nose can smell the code smells, right? That's their whole responsibility, is to just say, wow, that code smells bad. And then maybe the team can refactor together, right? Another one is the archivist. So you see the gentleman in the back there writing a card because they heard something new while the navigator was telling the driver what to do. And you can see the researcher on the end here. I really love this picture because it's really animated and you can kind of see 4 separate roles happening all at once. Traffic cop. So this is the person that says, hey, we made a working agreement and we didn't follow it. Do we want to back up and follow the working agreement? And then there's others that have been created. And so I'm kind of rushing along through my slides. I'm going a little fast here. I figured the Q&A might be more interesting and we can kind of go through that. So let me know to slow down. If anybody wants me to slow down, I can. Other mobs or other taxonomies exist. So this is not the only one. At IBM, they created the one that you see in the background here. There's also another taxonomy developed by Jay Bazuzzi, and that's also an open source one. And there's many others. It's really great to kind of see those things. So, naming these things are really, is actually really helpful because a lot of people struggle with this, like, how is mobbing financially reasonable for 4 people to be there? Are you just paying for a constant code review? It's like, no, there's many financial reasons, and we can talk about that a little bit. I want to, talk a little bit now about lofty goals, and our success is not only mob programming, right? Mob programming is just a practice, but you can do any sort of practice and run it into the ground, I think. So I'll kind of maybe talk about a little bit about the lofty goals that are here to set us up for success, maybe. We came up with lofty goals initially. I think it's kind of like a thing that Woody would always talk about. And then we expanded on our lofty goals as we went forward. And so we had some really interesting stuff. So kindness, consideration, and respect. So this was part of our first retrospective, I think, that came out. This working agreement came out right after the first mobbing session. And they just said, and I know that the developer that said this was feeling very exposed. Like, my typing speed is different than your typing speed. My ability to write an algorithm is faster or slower than your ability to write an algorithm. And so the very first working agreement and lofty goal that we developed was treat everyone with kindness, consideration, and respect. And so, and kind of like that was our anchor. That's like where a lot of everything started and made it, you know, very good. Eventually, we added on be vulnerable, hold trust, and show appreciation. So this is kind of like the idea that, you know, you are going to expose your flaws in front of people, and you will trust them to treat you with kindness, consideration, and respect, and you will show them appreciation when they give you feedback or constructive criticism. And then that kind of finally leads into the concept of psychological safety, and as defined by Amy Edmondson's research, or radical candor, based off of the content in that book. This is the idea that you can give feedback to people without fearing repercussions, and treat people with psychological safety, and don't withhold feedback from them. So, you know, this has been a really important piece of that. So those were kind of the way that we interact from a interpersonal level. And then for like some of our technical lofty goals are as follows. No one between code and production. So this is the idea that we don't want humans between code and production. So you write the code, you commit it, and it should find its way to production automatically. You know, no humans after that point. And that's a lofty goal. I stole this from developers at Yahoo, and it's served us really well to talk about automation and process improvements, lean process improvements specifically. Also clean code. So this is based on the Bob Martin book, Clean Code. We just said, hey, we like that book, let's do that book. And so, you know, so this is the idea of keeping the code clean, refactoring regularly, finding good ways to create good taxonomies for things within the code base, and propagate them across the whole system. Zaro Boogs. So Zaro Boogs is from the Bugzilla software, meaning that if you run out of bugs or the bugs are gone, it says Zaro Boogs. And it's a funny word because it's an acknowledgement that you don't know if there are no bugs, but we have no known bugs. So Zaro Boogs is the name of this lofty goal. So no known bugs in production. And this is the idea that we write code in such a way that we don't get a lot of bugs. And if we do get a bug, it's the top priority, and we don't do anything else until it's gone. It makes it very easy to work with the code because that bug is going to get a unit test. And so it won't happen again. It won't ping pong like traditional bugs might. And you will then get back into the code with a safety net under you. Deliver working software to production daily. So this is the idea that, you know, don't go a day without having the software make it to production. And again, these are lofty goals. So you might have this as a lofty goal, and today you might be releasing once a year, right? So these are things to work toward. They're not necessarily the state of today. And so it's just really important to keep those things in mind. Anyone can take a vacation at any time, or leave the company, or change teams. So this is the idea of zero silos. And so, you know, this is why I asked the question on the chart there. It's like, can you think of anyone on your team that would be a disaster if they left the company? And there's some great answers on there. And, you know, one big thing that is really great in our environment with this zero silos lofty goal is that we can regularly rotate people between products, and they can stay effective. And in fact, a rule went into place a few years ago that no one can stay on a team for more than 2 years out of the last 3 years. So people have to spend a year off of a product at the very least, and then, you know, rotate between the teams, you know, as they want to. So it creates a great environment where and basically we say every question that you have to ask the person that left the team was kind of a failure on our part to make sure that we had appropriately transferred the knowledge. And so the person leaving should make sure that they're constantly sharing their knowledge with other people, and they shouldn't be a silo, right, actively. Effective interdepartmental communication. So this is a great little picture here. We have product owners there. You can kind of see the casual dress versus the more formal dress. That's how you know he's a product owner. and you know, we have product owners join the mobs, you know, so sometimes very briefly to look at what the team did. They say, yeah, that looks really great, or no, we need to change this, or this needs to be here or there. We have UX people that float in between teams, and so cross-functional interactions happen very often. And we want to make sure that cross-departmental interactions work very well as well. And then another one, continuously develop lofty goals and practices. So this is another one of like retrospecting on these rules or these goals, right? And experiment frequently, which I think you can see a lot of these experiments have led to more and more changes across the department. So, you know, don't look at all of this and say, oh my gosh, how would we ever get there? Like all I say to people is what you need is the virtuous loop. You need a place that people can learn, and you need a place that people can reflect and implement new practices and get rid of old practices. And then finally, what I'm doing here today, developing the software community. So, you know, talking about what we do and why and how and things like that. So those are the lofty goals. And then I will move into another slide here. So, you know, how can 4 people at one computer be more cost effective than 4 people at 4 computers, right? And so, you know, the easy answer, right, or the kind of the straightforward thing to say is like the software you write. So software developers are not paid by words per minute, right? So like if you saw a software developer just typing stuff in constantly and just writing stuff, they could be writing the same thing over and over again. And their for loop might be a hard coded, you know, 400 items where they just typed out every single item over and over again, right? It's the thinking. And so this is where a lot of these concepts come in. With mob programming, you get high bandwidth learning. Anybody that's not on the same page will be able to ask a question right away. That means that you are sharing that knowledge. That means that those people are becoming more capable. And as that mob fractures into other mobs, that knowledge goes with 4 different people. And so knowledge grows organically through and interpersonally throughout the department. And as you rotate people through the teams, you get, you know, design patterns moving from team to team, practices moving from team to team. So high bandwidth learning. So right now you'd have to hold multiple meetings at a company and train people, right? Experimentation. So it's hard to deal with other people, right? And so when you're sitting there with 4 people, you're initially going to be getting used to each other. And so you'll be running different experiments on how to work well together. And then eventually you'll reach a plateau, and you might try and figure out ways to then increase your skills. You kind of have an accountability partner in that. And so you have a sounding board, right? So this continuous improvement that would be very, very hard to create movement around becomes very natural and comes for free, right? Silos and risk. So, you know, we've already talked about this a lot. It's, you know, that person and their information and whether or not they're a silo, and how risky is it if they leave, and how hard would it be to get going again. And so with a turnover rate as high as what exists in the software development community in general, you know, I think turnover at a software company is something like 20%, you know, on average. So there are companies with a lot more than that. But we always put ourselves in a position where it's scary if someone leaves, right? Quality and technical debt. So this is another one, right? You have one person working by themselves, then they can put, you know, they're only working at their best at the time. And so they might have a habit of writing unit tests, but maybe they're tired one day and they don't write the unit test. That's much less likely to happen with 4 people. And so what happens is over time, you have a much more protected code base. And so you have fewer failures. Those fewer failures, kind of a bug-free code base, leads to additional development time. And so, you know, chances are that if you have too many bugs to count right now, you probably have multiple developers worth of time being wasted. So why not just put those developers together so they can write the code so they don't have to go back and do that in the future? Another thing is flow efficiency versus resource efficiency. This is the idea that we can use lean processes like value stream mapping, as shown in this picture, to eliminate process waste. And process waste feels very painful to 4 people. Process waste doesn't necessarily feel painful to 1 person, right? And so that throwing it over the fence, like, oh, the developer's finished writing the code and now it's going to the tester, and the tester is going to test it and then throw it back to the developers, but the tester's working on something else, so they have to wait to hear back from it. And so it's like, what's your average time before your code is tested to when a bug is found and sent back to the team? Also, feedback loops are happen very frequently. You essentially get this. You not only get the retrospectives, but you get feedback on your own personal skills. You can actually see what other people are doing and what you might not be. Even at a higher level, people, I think, naturally want to get things to work well, and they want to work together to make those things happen. And so these sorts of changes can happen fairly often and in that space. So this is what the physical space looked like before COVID. Since then, we've given up this building. We are not going back to the office ever again. Because what we found was that our product owners used to have to walk from building to building. So we have 11 buildings on our campus, and they would walk from building to building, and we'd see them walking from the marketing building to the mechanical engineering building. And we were like, no, out our window, we're like, no, you need to come here. We need a question answered, but they'd have to get to a meeting in the mechanical building. All that walking time ended up making us much less effective because we couldn't get questions answered quickly enough. Now in remote, we noticed that product owners are much more available. And so we've determined that for what we've lost in being in person, we have gained a tremendous amount of speed in getting questions answered and software written because the flow efficiency increased while the resource efficiency may have gone down within the team. Meetings and ceremony. So a lot of this ends up, we don't have a lot of meetings. Ceremony might be retrospectives and things like that. We do a lot of retrospectives, but in all reality, a software developer, if they volunteer for absolutely nothing else, can get away with about 1 to 2 hours of meetings a month. And the rest of that time is spent on either learning session time or software development time. And our learning sessions are 7 hours a week. So a week, an hour every morning, and then 2 hours at the end of the day on Fridays. So I like to talk about this idea of like a group consciousness. So like, whether or not you're going to do a habit, perform a habit, it's very easy to forget as an individual. It's much easier to remember to do something as a group. And a lot of times it's not even the same person that remembers. And so it's just been tremendously useful to see that sort of stuff play out. So psychological safety and interpersonal risk taking. So I talked a little bit about psychological safety. I think a really great result of the psychological safety is that people do take risks interpersonally. They do say, hey, I have a bit of feedback for you. I've seen people that had maybe a 14 word a minute typing speed be recommended that they go play typing games for their learning session. And an entire team had started playing typing games together during their learning sessions so that everybody could improve their typing speed together. And specifically, it was around feedback for 1 or 2 people, but the entire team kind of took that on together. Pairing versus mobbing. So there's a funny story that I can't remember who told me this, but they said, programming by yourself is like watching Netflix alone. And mob programming is like going to the movie theater with your friends. And pair programming is like going on a date. And so the interpersonal risk in pair programming is much higher because people can get upset with each other much more easily than when you're in a group. You know, people hand off responsibilities, there's less tension. And so pair programming comes with a lot of these like one-on-one interpersonal risks that you don't experience in groups. And so I really liked that description, because it was really kind of telling to why mobbing, I think, to me, feels much more natural than pair programming. The Steamroller Effect is another kind of one of these maybe anecdotal stories. It's the idea that you know, somebody was like, you know, what happens when the team becomes stuck? You know, I'm like, well, they don't really ever get stuck. And then I realized, like, why is that? And it's like, okay, so if mobbing feels slow, then it's more like a steamroller, right? So if you have a you know, medium-sized boulder in front of a steamroller, you're going to get there very slowly, but you're going to roll over it, and then you're just going to move on, right? But if you're in a Ferrari and there's a medium-sized boulder, then a lot of bad stuff is going to happen, right? And so the steamroller effect is this idea that a mob might feel slow a little bit, but what happens is nothing gets in your way. You don't stop. If something's blocking you, you're saying, hey, we have 4 people waiting on you. Is there anything that you can do to make this thing happen faster? So your flow efficiency, naturally, people are asking for flow efficiency to go up, which is why I like to call that the steamroller effect. The law of personal mobility, just like open space, if you're not contributing and you're not learning, go to a different mob. And so people ask me, what's the right size of the mob, right? And the reality is that there is no right size. The right size is everyone's engaged in the problem at hand. And so I would suggest that larger mobs are better as long as you're following this rule. And so I've been part of a very engaged mob working on a quantum computing problem on an API key that we got from a quantum computer vendor. And we had 20 people in the room kind of bouncing back and forth, like, how does this work? Why does it work that way? We had some people that were really interested in physics. And so, you know, and then you have the people that can just leave if they're not interested. They can, you know, if they're not learning and they're not contributing, go to a different mob, right? And that's how you remain cost effective. You trust the people to self-organize. No more code reviews. So I know that lots of people out there spend tons of time in code reviews. Like, we don't do code reviews. We haven't done a code review. So in the amount of time that we've been doing mob programming, we haven't done a code review, and we haven't done pull requests, and we commit to the master branch. And I think I've heard of merge conflicts happening very infrequently, because the decoupling of the code happens much more frequently. Even if 3 mobs are all working on the same code base, the systems are so decoupled that it's extremely infrequent that 2 people are in the same file ever. And so another thing is just second order effects. So this is a little bit of the team dynamics. So take into account everything that I just talked about. What's the side effect of doing any one of these things, and then combine them, right? You have to think of it from like a systems thinking, complex adaptive systems, and you know, understand, you know, what's the side effect of learning session? Well, new information is being injected into your team. Well, what's the side effect of that? What people don't realize is that without a learning session, your junior developers are at home learning on their own time. Your senior developers have personal lives that have grown to take over that time that they used to have as junior developers. And so what happens is your junior developers become the most equipped people to move your code base into a new technology. And so that's the side effect of the side effect, right? So if you have learning time, then that senior developer is actually more likely to advocate for a new technology than if you didn't have a learning session. Because if you didn't have a learning session, they don't have time to learn it off the job, and they have deliverables on the job. They will never want to move out of that because they can't perform, and then they'll have bad performance reviews, right? The whole system's set up against you if you don't have dedicated learning time. And so those are like the side effects of the side effects I'm talking about. So like, what happens if you don't have psychological safety? Well, feedback doesn't circulate, and your team will never perform to the most effective ability that it can. What happens if people don't receive feedback about their typing speed? Well, the entire mob will get slowed down because they're in a state of ruinous empathy, right? So that's a little bit of like complex adaptive systems thinking. So we've been doing this now for 10 years, come September. So I guess like we started in September-ish. So this is 10 years now that we have done this nonstop every day, every work day for 10 years now. And I have a time lapse of what our day looks like in the office. We're making another one for remote. It's a little bit harder to put together, so we're still taking some time to do that. And then here's a little bit the timeline I promised earlier, which is, these are the different. This is the cycle time, the types of testing, the style of programming, and the year in which things were introduced. So in 2011, there was solo with manual regression, 6 months to a year and a half to deploy anything. 2012, it became one mob with unit testing and manual regression, and it took us about 2 weeks to deploy anything. 2013, one mob unit testing with manual smoke testing, or manual smoke testing essentially went away. So it was about a day of cycle time. 2014, one mob unit testing. Oh, whoops, I went back there. Let's go backwards. Automated smoke testing went to about half a day because we were kind of like doing the smoke tests a little bit in there. 2015, we started unit testing, doing E2E with Gherkin, manual and automated testing about every 2 hours. Then we started really scaling up. And so we started, in 2017, we're releasing about 12 times a day. Right now, I think we're releasing somewhere in the order of 14 times a day at least, to production environments. And so, from experience, mobbing scales very well if you can provide that foundation. And so thank you very much. That's more or less the presentation. Mob programming worked well for us. It might work for you. It's something to try. I'm not saying it will work for you. I'm just saying that it's just something that we started doing and we never stopped. And it's been really great. And we've kind of formed a culture around it and other things along those lines. And so I can kind of like walk through a bit of these, too many bugs, many bugs, countless. So this is how many bugs are in your bug database. Mob programming, trying once a week. We tried a version of this designed for designing a building once. It was a hoot. A few years, few hours at a time, 90 minutes weekly over 6 months. Very little, need to do more. And then what was the cycle time for a single team? Way too long, and 1 to 3 weeks. So if anybody left your team, would it be disastrous? It's way too many senior developers in the org who don't like to mob. I knew to know, yes, inspirational, intelligent leader that motivates the org and process. Oh yeah, I got a key person retiring next year and another guy who is looking to go part-time. Everyone, we're a small team and company. Yes, many unclear. So how often does your team experiment? Unclear new process definition for existing manual processes. Not often, a little bit once in a while, frequently in between weekly and monthly. They don't like to experiment fairly often. And then can you think of anything that should have been automated a long time ago? Yes, many things. Yes, sometimes there's comfort in routine though. Yes, and oh yeah. So this has been my experience. I don't know. We can talk a little bit now, if you like.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
I switched from one computer to the other and I forgot to grab the link you threw in the chat.
Oh yeah.
Of course,
absolutely.
on a new computer.
Let me throw that up again.
Thanks.
Let's see, chat.
Where is that chat?
Yeah, so the link's in there again. Let's see, mob programming. So
oh, didn't show up.
2016. So this is the video that I send to people often. So this is you know, the day in the life. But now, obviously, we don't have this building anymore. We are essentially doing the same thing, but remotely, using AnyDesk or TeamViewer, all remote in the same machines, and Microsoft Teams to allow us to walk around the room, quote unquote. This idea of like being able to join any mob at any time without having to be invited to it. So yeah, are there any questions? Anything else that, let's see, I'm looking at the chat right now. So does your team only mob? Yes, they do. There's no requirement. The only requirement that's there for the department is 2 pairs of eyes must review every bit of code, right? So that might mean if you write it solo, there must be a code review. If you pair on it, that's fine. If you mob it, you know, that's fine too. So it's very rare that anybody will go down to a pair. No one really wants to write code alone because code reviews are not fun. Question, how do the learning sessions differ from regular coding sessions? What's their structure? So initially, the way that Woody had structured it, it was code katas, and we would rotate Randori style with strict driver and navigator and just go around the room. And we would just rotate and rotate and rotate. You know, gradually over time, the skill differences, as we scaled up the team, the skill differences were so wide that we kind of went to this kind of like mentorship-ish model, or, you know, you could kind of do your own thing, or you can ask, you know, people for help or publish your learning sessions. And so right now they're very informal, but we've had a lot of new technologies make it into our system. So continuous integration, continuous delivery all came in through learning sessions. Infrastructure as code came in through learning sessions, and many others. Yeah. Thanks, Ted. Let's see. Is there someone there commenting the code along the driver, or does the driver do it? We don't comment any of our code. I'm looking at the reactions on the screen. So what we do is we make sure that the names and the levels of abstraction are descriptive enough that code comments are unnecessary. And so the only time we would ever comment code is if there is a, we usually will put a link into, I'll just get rid of this now. Let's see here. So we will.
So it's kind of like the Don Knuth idea that basically if it's legible like English for all of you, you're good with it.
Yes, exactly. So the code should be understandable and readable. And anytime we come into a code base with comments, the first thing we do is we delete them without reading them. And the reason for that is because even the function names, like if you have a bug that needed to be on, you need a Stack Overflow lookup or something like that, what you can do is you can just name the function, remediation for bug, and then on Stack Overflow, and then somebody can do a git blame to look at the commit message for that, and then you can put all the notes in there. So your git repo becomes your comments, if at all. Mm-hmm. Everything else is just documented with domain language. So and specifically Arlo Belshi's like 7 stages of naming, which has formed into deep roots something or other. I forget the name of the new thing.
And I had a follow-up question to that. Yeah. Is that who does documentation, like standard documentation?
So we the only real documentation that happens is our product owners will document how to use the software when it goes out, because we have automated tests that will cover everything. So if you ever need to know how to use something, a lot of the times you can look at the automated test that exercises that full stack code path, and then look at any unit tests that test the variances. And so If it's not code, then it's not reliable. And so we just don't look at anything that's not code.
So then the documents become a description of what was tested, basically. The
Yes.
tests become the requirements for the documentation, so to speak.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
And in fact, if anybody ever asks me for a historic Gantt chart, we generate it off of the test names. So I will never build a Gantt chart. It will just, there's a Python script that runs, collects everything, shows the Gantt chart, and then it comes out.
But yeah, forces like kind of test driven.
Yeah. How do you incorporate elements of Scrum, backlog refinement, etc.? So we do pure Kanban. And so in our environment, backlog refinement a lot of the times is putting things in a nice to have section and then never looking at it again. And just really just working on the next most important thing. It's very rare that anything comes out of the backlog that isn't of immediate concern. And so there are refinement ceremonies sometimes, especially for really large teams. I think we have a team of 11 people with 3 mobs. And so that ends up happening. But oh, whoops, hang on. The video kept playing in the background. Let's see, but I mean, so Scrum can work in this. So the only thing I say about Scrum is make sure that you hold nothing sacred about Scrum. So, retrospectives should result in changes to the fundamentals of Scrum. So a retrospective should change your sprint length. A retrospective should allow developers to say, we're no longer going to track burn down anymore. Retrospective should allow for many things, right? And so Scrum should become your own. If you're doing vanilla Scrum, that's probably an indication that you haven't been retrospecting in a way that creates action items that really change your process. Let's see, along with code commenting, okay, yeah, the follow-up. So what's capsule testing? Google doesn't have anything about it. So capsule testing, I just answered this question, came from, capsule testing, I think also is synonymous with Detroit style testing in the London versus Detroit style unit testing argument or discussion. So that'll come up. And then I tweeted the answer to this not too long ago, and I think I can find it. Let's see, home and mentions. Where are my mentions? Notifications, mentions. Here we go. Just answered it. Anyway. Oh yeah, here it is. I found it. It's this link right here. Everyone. All right, there you go. So that came from this YouTube video from a conference. And it's called from RailsConf, and it's the magic tricks of testing by Sandy Metz. And Sandy's description of capsule testing, I think, was spot on and really good. And so, but yeah, it's that kind of thing of like, so London style tests are you're testing individual pieces of functionality and mocking out all dependencies. Capsule testing is like end to end. So you mock out the UI layer and you mock out the database and you just do a full test of everything in between. So that's kind of what we're doing. Incorporates others, commenting documents, capsule. I'm having trouble keeping up with the chat. Okay. Chris, you mentioned that you want to have a team switch every year, but according to good agile practice, you want to have cross-functional team that stay a while. So it's every 2 years, but people can switch more frequently. I don't necessarily agree with like the agile team that stays a while. I think that if people can understand a more global process, then something like the FAST framework, which is something that I think is really great, so the FAST framework is this idea that you just hold an open space for features that need to be developed. And then people just take those features from the open space and they self-organize and then they go for 2 days and then they come back. So I think that I think it's a misconception that you need to keep the same people together for a long time. There are benefits though. You get very comfortable and you can do that, but you will silo those 4 people together. And so if those 4 people were then redirected to something else, they become the only people that can answer those questions. And gradually turnover will eliminate people on that team. So what I like to use instead is this concept that, if everybody knows the Greek mythology ship of Theseus, this idea that, if you have this ship and parts of it get damaged and then it gets replaced, renovated over and over again, then eventually every plank of wood on the ship gets replaced. I like to think of a software team that way. So the code that we started writing is 15 years longer than my career, and the code that I'm going to be leaving when I move to another company will go on for decades after I leave. And so I am only a plank of wood in the ship of Theseus, right? And so the idea here is that you need to be really good at rotating people out in and out of your teams quickly to be an effective software team, because anything other than that means that people are not taking vacations because they feel too about not being around, and other things along those lines. Is there a list of companies that are hiring for Mob? Yes, there is. I just updated this list. It's really great. So let me put this up here.
Is that the link after the question?
Maybe. Yes, except it's now on a Trello board. And so that was the original one. And if you follow that link and go to the next link in there, you'll find a huge list of great resources. So yeah, here's the companies. Thank you for posting that, by the way. Every time I post something in the chat, it sends me to the bottom. Okay. Thanks, Paul. The URL for the video. Yeah, so if you search YouTube for Mob Programming 2016 or Mob Programming 2012, those are the 2 time-lapse videos that we had. And here that link is. Let's see, where are we now?
Any downsides to a shorter cycle time to production? That's a question.
It's hard to get people to buy into that, but what we do is we decouple our cycle time from the product owner. So product owner's like, oh no, I don't want to release it, right? So what we did is we incorporated feature flags. So whether the product owner likes it or not, we're releasing multiple times a day. And then if the product owner says, yeah, that's good to release, we turn on the feature flag. So there's no, and this all came through learning sessions as well, but there's no, so the teams are releasing multiple times a day, but the product owner may not show a feature until they want to do a big marketing splash or whatever else they want to do. With that said, some product owners will release to their customers every week, or other product owners will hold on to something until they have something a little bit bigger. And really, we encourage them to show it right away. But sometimes there's just bigger pieces of functionality that need to all exist at the same time for the system to be useful.
There was one question, if there's nothing else on that one.
Sure, go ahead.
Could you, Monica said, could you comment on a little on the changes when mobs transition from co-located to located to remote?
Yeah. So it was basically mid-March 2020, and we just got an email from HR saying, everybody go remote now. And so that's just what we did. We just said, okay, fast series of experiments. Let's see what we can do. So we tried EC2 instances. We tried AnyDesk, TeamViewer, sharing over Zoom. There's a group of mob programmers in Germany that have a command line tool called Mob, which will actually use the repo as a central way to move between people's computers. And so you can basically have your own laptop and rotate it remotely. And they run the website remotemobprogramming.org. And so we tried a bunch of different things. And then we all came back and said, what are the positives and negatives? And we just said, we really like this idea that we can just get spun up really fast. Like somebody joins our team, they are writing code in our code base with us the first minute they're there with us. You know, there's no waiting for us to like install dependencies on the machine and things like that. You know, since then, I think Jay Bazuzzi has created a library of EC2 instance PowerShell scripts that will essentially spin up any environment for any code base based on these scripts. And so that's another really great resource. So we went remote. We had Microsoft Teams already, and we discovered that you can have channels and people can meet inside those channels in the chat channels, and a camera icon will show up. And next to that camera icon, you can click on that and see all the people currently in that room. So you could literally just like click and join a mob, and then they'd be mid-sentence describing what to do next. And so we just said like, this is really great. This is kind of like the office. So then we just kept all our meetings. We went to online retro tools like we used today. So we used retrotool.io. Another one is like ideaboards.com, and another one, you know, Miro is the really popular one. And that all worked really well. And so, you know, when we transitioned, we were like, oh man, this is going to be terrible. We have this really great in-person environment. And then we're like, well, you know, what's not going well because we're remote? We're like, well, actually we're seeming to be getting more done. And so kind of the root cause analysis of that was that there's no commute times, which means that people that were commuting over an hour are now have more energy and they're happier. And then the product owner story that I told you, the people that we depend on to get things done are more available more often. And so we just said, we never want to wait for the walking time ever again. We don't want to wait for somebody to go from their building to ours. And the way to guarantee that is that we stay remote. And so we had a really positive experience there as we went forward.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
How easy it is to hire a new team member, and how long does it take to onboard them?
Yeah, so onboarding happens in you know, maybe an hour or two, besides the HR onboarding, which is like a whole day. So HR takes longer than we do. But you know, hiring associate level developers, really easy. Hiring more senior level developers, the market's still very competitive, and you know, some people come and work with us just because they want to work with us, and sometimes they take a pay cut for that. But in other cases, you know, that's not true. And so I'll just say that you know, 2020 we had no turnover, and 2021 we had the longest turnover we've ever experienced. While we were in the office, you know, basically it was very easy to find new people, and people really wanted to do that, that sort of thing. But I think the new environment is still fluctuating, and you know, the market comps for engineers and things like that are all over the place. But in general, we get a lot of really skilled people wanting to come and work with us, and we get a lot of people interviewing with us often.
There was a question for you, Chris. Is Hunter still doing visits with the mobs on Wednesdays?
Yes, yeah. So we basically, so you can just email me, chris.lucian@hunterindustries.com, you know, or contact me on Twitter or whatever, and we can set up a visit, and you can just mob with us for a day if you like. Sometimes we get scheduled out multiple months of these visits, and other times we don't. We've also been doing a developer exchange program with another company that's mobbing, basically saying, we're going to send somebody to mob with you for a week while you send somebody to mob with us, or a day, or however long. And we sign, you know, kind of mutual NDAs and things like that. And that's been going really well too. And so, yeah, if you want to come program with us for a day, it's a lot of fun, and people really seem to enjoy it. And whether or not you're technical, it kind of just the day rolls by. And so,
Chris, I have a couple questions for you.
Yeah,
if that's okay. So one is, in regards to onboarding, when you have somebody that comes in because you're mobbing, do you notice like what's the difference with are 8 people able to be effective on day one and actually producing, or what have you noticed?
Yeah, so what happens is, like, if you hire one person, they join a mob of 4, and then they go into the rotation and they just learn all the social norms, right? So it just happens naturally. Like, they're onboarded through conversation and discussion, and they get opportunities to navigate. Often, when we hire like more senior developers, we'll often have them immediately start contributing things that we didn't think of because they just have other experiences.
Right,
and so we've seen people begin navigating like almost all day from like never having been in the company before. And this is like in our visitor program, actually, we get a lot of this too. It's like somebody comes to visit, but then helps us solve some major problem. We're just like, wow, thank goodness you came to visit today. And so there's a lot of really cool stuff that happens there. But in general, I'd say that onboarding time is essentially non-existent. Like it's so short. Yeah.
So like reteaming is a non-issue for you. I mean,
you
do it on a regular basis, right? You don't even think about it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It happens very regularly. I mean, storming, forming, norming, and the Satyr change model, all that stuff happens still. But again, it's like, it's the difference between going on a date with someone for the first time. Like, I'm pair programming with you, my skills are completely in front of you, and I am, I'm now nervous about it, versus going to the movie with friends. And so it's like, oh, I'm going to join my friend at a movie for the first time ever. And so I've never met any of these people, but I'm a lot less nervous than if I was on a date. I think that sort of dynamic plays out.
So I have a.
One sec, I got a request to put your contact email on the chat. And
while you do that,
you guys are mulling over your other questions. I'm gonna invite you to take a minute and answer a poll, please.
Okay.
Because I feel like the people is going to start dropping off, and I would like to collect the feedback. Can everyone see the poll?
Yeah.
There are 2 questions.
Just give everybody a minute to answer.
So while people are answering those 2 questions, Chris, I'd like to do a follow-on to Wee's previous question, and a slight twist on it. So the FAST model, where they're basically creating teams on a every 2 days basis, it occurs to me as I look at that really they've got an organization of 40 developers, testers, whatever, but an organization of 40, that is a team.
Yeah,
they're forming sub-teams on a 2-day basis. So they've really got that trust, the psychological safety, that kind of thing within the large organization. M. Campbell Pretty talks about that in her book Tribal Unity, about building that kind of organizational trust. But the question we just asked you was about a new person. And so that's really interesting, because that person's not part of those 40 people. So how does it differ significantly when it's the new person versus the person who was at the next team over for a long time and just walked in?
No, I'll say, like, we do the visits every week, and during those visits, I mean, it's very natural, right? And that has much less stress than joining a brand new team from somebody who's been onboarded. But also our interview process is 4 hours long, and is also an interview, is a mob as well. And so people kind of get used to it even on the interview. But I would say that in general, onboarding someone new is really, if they're comfortable working this way, then it's just jump in and start programming. It's very much like being at a open space and doing a code dojo or something like that, right? And especially if you were recently hired, a lot of people are just there, like, really wanting to get to the point where you're contributing and not having tons of questions anymore. And so they're going to be answering your questions rapid fire. We have a number of like little follow-up meetings here and there, just say, hey, is there anything else that you want clarification on and things. But Usually in my follow-up meetings with somebody who's new, they often don't have a lot, because they're like, oh yeah, my team has already just talked to me about that, and a lot of the time they're just integrated into the system very quickly. So you know, we have had people that you know, one person left our team because they went, you know, every mob that they were on, they found somebody to be enemies with, and then that led to some self-reflection of like, oh well, if I'm making a new enemy every mob I'm on, then maybe it has something to do with the way I'm acting, not the way others are. Yeah. And so you know, they just kind of realized that it's just not something that they wanted to be doing. But you know, I think in every other case, it's been just kind of like a natural, you know, join the team, start programming together, rotate. You get time to ask questions. You get time to contribute. You kind of find your groove and just keep rolling forward.
So I had so you mentioned that, like, you know, talking about somebody that doesn't fit. And you probably get this question every now and then, right? I imagine you get it a lot. Is who is it not suitable for? And like, what's the interview process like when you get somebody who's like, maybe they're not the right person for this type of work?
So so there's a lot to that. When we first started interviewing for these roles and we designed our interview at the very beginning, we had people that, you know, sat down at the keyboard, looked at it a little bit, it got up and left without talking to anybody. And so that was like, whoa, we did something crazy wrong. Like, what did we do wrong there? So now it's like, we give links, we have HR tell them, like, you're going to be in a mob programming environment. This interview is going to be, you know, mobbed, et cetera, et cetera. And so the person definitely has an idea of what mobbing is, what it looks like. If they've never done it before, it's probably something that they're okay with trying at the very least. And so that's been pretty reasonable. So in general, yeah, in general, it's, and so the interview is essentially, we have the person come in. Immediately, we have them do we just ask them to write a unit test for something very simple. Then we then say, okay, we're going to bring in the mob. And so it's just one person, one-on-one. And then we bring in the mob and we just say, okay, now tell this other person to do what you just did on your own at the keyboard. So we let them get comfortable with the keyboard, start typing. And so they've already solved the problem in the normal traditional way that they would. So then they solve it using words, which a lot of people are like, oh wow, like that ends up being harder because all code must be verbalized in our environment. It has to be said out loud, right? And so then they do the rest of the exercises. So something around debugging, refactoring, database design, object-oriented or functional programming, over the next 4 hours, and they just have these events, and then we do a lean coffee at the end. And that's essentially how we do those. And it's pretty natural at that point. So and we stopped ending interviews early at all. So we just tell the candidate, you know, hey, if you want to end the interview at any time, just let us know and we can stop. And that's been better as well, because I think people realize that they're not going to solve any of our problems or something along those lines, and don't want to waste anybody's time. So so those are the types of things that end up coming out of that. I know there's a couple more questions in the chat here. Remote work often involves more asynchronous work. Are there allowances for this work with mob programming? So we don't do asynchronous work. Remotely, we don't do asynchronous work. So what happens is you start your day, you do your learning session, and you get into your mob, and the mob does the work. If you need to step away, you can step away, and you can do your emails and stuff like that. But in general, essentially 7 hours a day, 5 hours a day on Friday, we are working as a mob, and we are there from 8 to 4 Pacific time. So there's no asynchronous work in our remote environment. So it's kind of a weird thing. I know that's probably very uncommon. Why doesn't everyone mob? Oh, that in general. Chris is okay. So we have the visits. Thank you for the feedback on the talk. Remote mob.
Hey, no, seriously. Why don't more people do this? This sounds amazing. That was an honest question.
Yeah. So in that, if you look at that companies that mob Trello board, the practice is spreading very quickly. I think now the momentum, so the first 4 years we were doing it, people were just kind of laughing at our posts and stuff. But now, I would say that, people have at least heard of it when I run into them now. When I'd say 6 years ago, that wasn't true. And in general, people have tried it at some conference. I think the community luminaries, people like Kent Beck are talking about it now, things like that. So I just think that it's just something that at least people should try it. But also I'll say environments can still be seriously broken and mobbing. And so, because I want to say a lot of the things that we do is based off of self-organizing principles and psychological safety and all other stuff. So I want to stress that. But, again, it's to me, it's the virtuous loop. Over 5 years, any development group can become awesome by implementing learning sessions and having retrospectives with concrete action items. And it's just a matter of time because they iterate until, iterate to greatness sort of thing. But yeah, it's definitely a practice that's spreading. And, people, there's a lot of conference talks about it. People that I've never heard of talk about it now, which also was an interesting thing to start seeing happen. See, does remote mobbing work well because you established mobbing and currently while in person? I've joined a number. So I can't answer that question objectively because I haven't been in an environment that wasn't mob programming first. To then. Or in person first, I guess. But I will say that I've joined a number of code retreats where people were mobbing online, and in those mobbing code retreats, it was very natural, and people were like, "This is great," and it just kind of rolled forward. So, what if you are?
Chris?
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, this is Doug. Hey, have you seen? Or are you aware of any of your colleagues that have actually just started a company remotely mob programming?
Well, so are you saying they, somebody from my team went and started a company, or are you saying?
No, just other coaches just went into a company that wasn't doing mobbing. They were working remotely and they got it bootstrapped.
Absolutely. So those remote mob programming guys, those were all they were all remote and then switched to mob programming, I think.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
But I think just in general, most of those stories, a lot of the stories that are coming up about mob programming now are about people that started it within the last year. And so I'll say, and then even on that same board, Austin Chadwick, who co-hosts the Mob Mentality podcast with me, he added a bunch of coaches that also do mob programming. So if you scroll to the right on that board of companies that mob, you'll see coaches that mob. And so those are all people that either train mob programming or are leaders that implement mob programming in their organization. And then there's also professors that teach mob programming as well now in that list. And so there's some research that's happening, is mob programming more effective than individual programming? Is it more effective than, so there's some more scientific research. And there's a coach, there's a robotic coach or a coach bot that goes in and prompts students to mob in different ways and things like that too. Really interesting stuff. And so you'll see, you know, if you search any of their names and mob programming, you'll find them talking about mob programming. When I went to Japan, it was all over the place. There's a company in Japan that does mob everything. So Val Labs, who manages the train data for Japan, they do mob HR, mob finance, mob programming. And what's really interesting is their entire wall is a safe release train that has every department's deliverables for every single item that anybody in the company is doing, not just the software developers. So it's really a really interesting environment. When I toured there, that was really cool. But yeah, it's happening all over the world, and you know, and there's some really strong advocates for it as well. And a lot of these teams are remote. There was actually, there's a company on there in the second column called Ebcont, and they started mob programming. They just started mob programming like after being remote. And I've heard of many companies that have also moved to mob programming because remote was so disconnected from everyone. So they use it as a way to cope with remote. Yeah, so there's what if you're a slow typer that cannot keep up with what others are saying? They're thinking putting 4 programmers at the same time is inefficient. Yeah, so we did have this sort of scenario, and the team did do typing exercises together to speed up everyone's typing. But also, I would say at the same time, you know, people have disabilities and other things like that. And so the mob may not, I mean, the typing is not the work, right? The typing has nothing to do with whether or not you're making software. The typing is just an input mechanism. And so I've seen instances of speech to text, as well as instances of just people that are in the rotation, but don't go to the keyboard, you know, just because of a disability. So I don't think that, you know, I think if a person is capable of typing faster than they are, they should practice that. But if a person is unable to do that, that's okay. I think we can be much more accommodating to people than I think otherwise we might think. Are there meetup groups that do mob programming projects together? Yeah, there's tons of them. And you know, there's there are those code retreats that happen often. I'd look for anything by let me see, I'm trying to think of it. I'll try and put up some links, but yeah, and then there's like Pub Mob and a couple of other ones out there. Let's see, are there, let's see, can you say a bit more about daily learning sessions? Yeah, so the daily learning sessions, you know, a lot of the times people will do that as a mob, but not all the time. Sometimes it's like, hey, I really need to know this thing about Angular, and I'm gonna go learn it. And so they're freeform now. They used to be very directed. But if the team has something to learn and everybody in the team needs to learn it, then there might be an initiative department-wide to go and learn that thing. So like any community, it takes time to build comfort, safety, getting, yep. How's it determined who plays what roles in the mob and how those roles change over time? Is everyone expected to play every role over a certain period? Yeah, so the mob programming RPG is examples of what people can be doing, but you can do multiple roles at the same time. You can make it very strict or very loose. And so I'll say that there's no requirement necessarily to do one role or another. It's mainly, you know, it's mainly a consideration of what you need at the time, right? Because there's more roles than there will likely be people in your mob. And it's more common that it's like, oh, we need a nose right now, or we need a sponsor right now. And then people just kind of naturally fall into the role. It's just nice that the mob programming RPG is a taxonomy for behaviors, right? What is the most important skill for someone who wants a career in mob programming? I think it's just practice at mobbing. I know it's kind of weird, but what I often tell people, especially students, is like, go get a group of friends and do this together, and and it'll be a really good time, and you'll learn a lot about your ability to mob and things. So my suggestion is go play the mob programming RPG, and just learn how to do it.
Out loud would be one of the challenges.
Yeah.
I can see that from my dear husband. As you were saying, like, verbalize the code. We have a rule of verbalizing the code.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you definitely want to. The driver is the smart input device.
Yeah.
Use the retrospective to find out how people are liking the roles. How are they switching roles, length of time? Yeah, so that's definitely an option, is just retrospecting. Retrospecting in all things is probably a good idea. Our teams do, some of our teams do retrospectives every 45 minutes. They'll do a 5-minute retro. Wow. What's going well, what's going poorly, how can we change? Other teams do once a week. We never go longer than once a week for a retro on anything. For any one particular team. So the process is regularly evolving. Yeah. Any other questions? Anything?
So I've got one. Chris, you addressed how many people are on a team, which is any number, and you prefer larger. But in every other case tonight, you've talked about teams of 4.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering why that is.
On average, in the last 10 years, I've seen them go down to 4. And I think what it is, so a mob gets bigger because the problem is so complex that 4 people are having trouble figuring it out on their own, right? And so it gets bigger and bigger, or people can learn, right? There's probably something very natural about 4 that occurs, where it's like the proper amount of like time to think in between rotations and things like that. But I think the most problems fall into that 4 people space. When you get down to 3, it feels like there's not enough of kind of conversation going, and I think a pair is even worse. But when you're at 4, it's a fluid conversation. People are bouncing ideas off of each other. There are enough people to kind of do supporting roles within the group. And I think there's been times where I thought we need to go smaller, which is anything that is rote work. So at one point we were told we're not allowed to automate any of the process that we were about to be asked to do. And this was, because it was another team's code base. And so we were like, okay, this is just very repetitive. Let's all split up and just do this on our own, right? But in all other cases, we would have said, wow, this is really repetitive. Let's automate that. And so the problem, I think, will always naturally grow to a certain extent because you're automating it. I'm going to write a generator, I'm going to make a database schema, and then I'm going to generate a CRUD app off of that database schema, and then I'm going to put software rules in it. Now you're making a whole bunch of software for very little input, which is something that the team decided to do one day. Or you get something totally novel that you've never done before, and the team just grows and grows and grows because there's people over there researching that, having a discussion, and we have one code base we're trying to commit to from one keyboard, but there's a lot of thought work happening around the destination that you want to get to. And that's where it grows a lot. But from day to day, I'm making features, cranking out features. They're all different enough that they're not automated. If you can't describe the feature with a domain specific language, but it's not so complex that it's totally novel. That's the spot where I usually see 4 people ending up in a mob, if that makes any sense. Thank you very much, everybody. I had a lot of fun. Good to see you, Mike. I know Mike Rizzi, I've seen you years and years ago. I remember you. And others. So anyway, yeah, very cool.
Great. You guys, we will send the recording of this event via Meetup in a couple weeks or so when we edit it. So stay tuned for that, and please join us in September. And in general, come over and over and over again. We like seeing everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a great one, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.